Anyways, welcome to Lunar Alchemy. Very excited to be with all of you and here with Bella to discuss the shadow of exhaustion. I feel like this is a theme that is pretty prevalent in our society, at least in the United States. I'm not exactly sure how everybody else experiences this around the world, but I assume it's kind of everywhere. So if you are somebody who finds yourself in the middle of an activity or a task or some form of work or job and you can't relax, this is the one for you. We're going to be talking about how this particular shadow frequency really influences our bodies, our health, our livelihood, and how we create that as a society. And hopefully we will get to a place today where we can examine what this gift of resolve is really about and why it leads on a path of relaxation for us. So super excited about that. Bella, you've been on, I know, more than just what's going on right here and now with this particular transit, but I know that you've been in a long process with your personal health around that may relate to this theme of exhaustion. And I'd love to hear you talk about your perspective with it and just understand more about your perspective of how you've learned to relate with this aspect of our wellness that has kind of transformed your life in a number of ways.
Yeah. So the 40 is in the ego center, and that is where we're trying to prove ourselves in the not self. And I can share the screen to show a little bit more. Let's see. So here we have the will center, heart center, ego center, center that has many names, and about 30-35%, maybe even more, maybe even less of people have this center defined. So in this chart, you see it's defined because right now the sun and the earth are in the channel of the 40 and the 37. So with this center undefined, there is a lot of pressure on the open ego to prove itself and to show up and to promise things and live up to them. And what we know, 70% of people, if they don't have a defined ego, they aren't here to prove anything. And that's where I feel like we're coming to critical points in society where, I mean, burnout, I don't know if that word even existed. I know that in Swedish it didn't exist like when I was a child. It started somewhere in the 90s where that became like a word that everybody used and everybody was burnt out. There is something happening in the way that we set up things in society, in organizations that lead to that exhaustion that the 40 is speaking about. It's funny because I didn't think about it that way, this transit. I didn't tune into the 40 as that. I was much more tuning into it kind of as that, not seeking for God outside of you. So kind of changing gears.
Well, that's awesome though. That's because that's, that in looking at Lunar Alchemy, we're really focusing on that edge of the spectrum that we call the shadow, which is where all of the consequences of our world are produced from our unconsciousness, the aspects of ourselves that we don't recognize as who we are. And what you're talking about is kind of the other end of that spectrum, the absolute solar awareness of there not needing to be any divinity outside of one's own self. Really a profound awareness, in my opinion, from this particular gene key, and one of the unique versions of that Siddhic frequency that kind of deviates from the norm of how we often look at that.
Yeah, I believe that we are so conditioned to show up, and it starts in school with grades. And some countries start even you're 7 years old and you get grades, and even worse, it's even a little bit worse, like in Sweden, where you start later, because then it becomes so important. Like everything changes when you're like 13 or something. You start getting grades. And also even the yearly review in many companies, like they're sitting you down and they're telling you where you didn't perform. But it's not so much on the inner wellness and the inner satisfaction. Is very much just those results that are very tangible that we often measure. So I feel like in that whole channel, that is a very powerful channel, in the sense that when we look here, we have the 40 and the 37. They are harmonic gates. They form a channel and they define the ego center and the emotion center. And there are also, and there are only 3 cases like that in the whole body graph. When we look at those in the wheel, 40 and 37 are going to be opposite. So they are both programming partners and they are harmonic gates. So they are always kind of going together. And what I feel with them is that I actually don't feel like this is even if we call them the father for the 40 and the mother for the 37 and the 64 doors, what I have seen this transit more and more is that both of them hold the yin and the yang. Somebody was asking me, because it sounds like the 40 needs like alone time and it needs rest and it needs an understanding partner, then would be the 37. So somebody was writing to me, Bella, can you explain this to me? Because it seems like the 40 is more feminine. And I just really feel like both of them are coming into sacred union in themselves. So that the 37, if you can think about Jesus, that's the tenderness that he had, and also that presence, that's kind of the masculine, the feminine. And the 40 also has a kind of relaxation, a kind of yin, a kind of surrender to it in that sense. But it's also here to resolve. It's also here to take action. So what are the kind of roles that we can, the new roles that are getting burst in society when we can have that yin and yang in balance in every single person. And you don't have to choose just yang action, masculine or feminine receptive introvert. It's like there is a dance between the two in everything. And that's the whole point that's the whole way of explaining it through the I Ching. It's those hexagrams, it's like spirals of DNA in a way, our code, and our code in all of us on a very quantum level is made up of yin and of yang.
Yeah, it's I think that's really interesting to bring in the qualities of yin and yang when looking at these energies, because when we're looking at the shadow of exhaustion, at least from my experience of American society in the United States, it is very much based on that masculine principle, where we may equate the use of our energy to a form of forcefulness, meaning rather than allowing an obstacle to define our path, we're going to force our path through any obstacle. And that is kind of a value that's set up in this country as being a way that you can express your power in the world, and that your ability to overcome obstacles that in that particular manner is sort of what defines how much value you have to a company or to society in general. And to me, that's a very shadowy form of masculine energy, because it's completely unbalanced. When you look at the repressive side of this shadow, it's more about doing that on an internal basis rather than looking at external obstacles. But our society doesn't recognize that as even part of the equation. When you come into a company, or to any form of organization, the concept of self-compromise or is more frequently termed sacrifice. So interesting that the programming partner is really all about the Christ energy and the life of Jesus and everything. Here, when you're using the shadow of exhaustion, when that's sort of running your system in some way, you're primarily, if you're in a repressive nature, primarily in some form of sacrificial use of your energies. And that causes that exhaustion of your life force. That's why people come home from work exhausted. It's why this, you were talking about this concept of burnout kind of rising up in the 90s. I'm not sure if it was like late 2000s or 2010s by the time this came up, but here's this idea of a weekend warrior, somebody who literally lives their entire life on the weekend because they're not using their life force in a way that supports their own life in their occupation or their job or whatever it is they're doing during the week. This is a massively exhaustive problem. And while some body types might be able to sustain that type of lifestyle for a number of years, even, at some point, you're just going to fall apart. There's not going to be really any way around that, because at some point that misuse of energy in your system is going to come back and bite you.
Yeah, and I love what Richard Rudd is bringing in the 40s Gene Key about prenatal chi and postnatal chi. So it's how is that use of energy and how we use it, and the way that the world is made up, so that we use up that life force that is in us, and then we are not so good at maybe finding the right sources to resource. And yeah, it's very physical. It's actually, and then the physiology for the 40 is the stomach. So how much can we stomach? Of course, we have that inherent life energy and we're young, and then we can do a lot. But then what happens the more when we get depleted, how much can we stomach? And I guess that's actually a question that I feel like we can ask ourselves, even in the world right now, with some of the rules, with some of the pressure that's there. Like, how much are we going to stomach before it's a no? And is it going to be the body that has to say no and show, or can it be like the human heart and the inner truth of knowing that is saying no? And I think it's kind of interesting right now as we're talking. Pluto's been here forever. It went on into 16. It's back in 61. This is the psychosis. It has to do with the attachment to the old structures of Capricorn. And now we have, as we're speaking here, the moon is moving into the opposition to Pluto. So 62 and 61, which are also very much the feminine and the masculine. The 62 is the logic, the intellect, and of course in the acidic frequency or higher frequencies beyond that. And then the 61 is that kind of fundamentalist that doesn't have any proof, any science, very just abstractly decides that this is the truth, or this is how it's going to be. And Richard Rudd speaks in the 62 and the 61 as well, that they are the main reason for all human disease, which again has to do with that imbalance of the yin and the yang. So there is something very, very much speaking to this. And we are in the 6th line right now of the 40 and the 37, which is kind of that cellular truth, and also has to do with the future. So I think it's asking us, how are you going to use your body or energy in the future? How are you going to have equilibrium between yin and yang in the future? What are the roles that you are going to take on, whether it's community as a family tribe or in an organization? So, and how, since it's tribal, it's also like, how are you going to have the back of the other person that's in your team? Because that I can feel as well. At least what I remember from Sweden, there was even a shame around being burnt out. Like, some people kind of used it as, oh, thank God now I have a diagnosis now. But some people are really ashamed. And even I think that there is not a a natural way really to relate to it. Anna, who I work with, she actually got burnt out a year and a half ago in Amsterdam. And it was really kind of funny dynamics, how it was when she was starting to come back. She was supposed to work 2 days and then like work more and more. It's like we don't have really what tools to understand it or to hold each other's back. And I think that speaks about, yeah, it's there's something there with a tribal energy of being there and supporting each other, where I feel like there is something maybe missing. It's one thing is holding your brother when he's working really hard, but can you also hold your brother when he needs rest? That's the question.
Yeah. Well, there's so many directions I would love to go in with this conversation, but what you're talking about to me is it's bringing up this sort of cultural idea that we have about how willpower functions. When we're talking about how maybe how do we handle a burnout within a community or a tribe where a person has more than likely been using their energy in a way that is not well suited to their essence and their being for quite some time. They experience burnout. When the community itself and every individual inside it believes that this is a disease of the willpower, then there's no way that we can overcome this challenge. It's literally impossible because we've planted the problem in the wrong place. When we look at a person who is using their energy in a way that is not well suited to them, they may have the strongest willpower on the planet, but that will not prevent the manifestation of disease in their body at some point. And what it makes me think about is just how unable we are in general as a society, as individuals within society, to even perceive and discern how different uses of energy affects us, not only in the moment, but on the level of the long term. When we look at capitalist society in general and how our work-life relationship has evolved since the Industrial Revolution, every corporation has developed itself based on this idea of its employees as commodities or as capital, and of making the maximum efficiency of that capital. Now, in some places around the world, that view is starting to kind of shift, like in Sweden. I know that there's a lot of experimentation with 4-day work weeks, and that in a lot of places that are trying this, they're discovering that productivity is at least staying the same, if not increasing, because the amount of focus that a person is able to have while they're actually at work is so greatly increased by the added, time away from work. And it's really, really interesting. And that we can see such a direct correlation between giving adequate time for rest and relaxation based on a use of energy that may or may not be perfectly suited to a person's system. I think human society is a very, very long way away from every single individual being able to just do the perfect job that fits their system and allows them to thrive entirely in what they're doing, even though that's the direction I believe we're headed, But so for at least some long period of time, our collective organizational structure is going to be built off of people using their energy in some way that is not suited to their essence or their being. So if we're going to continue to evolve, we have to figure out ways to understand the needs of the people around us that is going to allow them to be functioning optimally in a situation that is almost impossible to make it optimized. You know, what is the best that we can get? And you know, I think there's so many different layers of comparative awareness that we have of like, well, this person works more than me, they make more than me, or whatever it is. You know, like people at different salary levels making working different amounts of time, and how we, you know, think that should all go. We've got a lot of work to do before I think our communities are going to really be able to deal with this particular shadow. But like I said, you know, places like Sweden, I know there's a few other places that are doing that experimentation with shorter work weeks. So maybe could be closer than we think. Who knows?
Yeah, and you know, I love what you say, and there's also a flip side to that, because if we think about how computerized everything is and how there are robots that can do things, so the flip side of it is when everything becomes so automatic, so we don't need humans anymore. And the 40, if we see it as the father archetype, he loves to come home to family that is grateful that he has been out in the world, and that he has worked, and that he brings home, you know, there's also this thing about being able to work and resolve, and then, you know, how that makes us feel purpose. And I believe that the flip side can be that we have everything can be done. I mean, even that for the first time buying clothes, I mean, in grocery stores, it's been self-service for a long time, but in stores where you have to take off that little, like the tag, the plastic tag, well, that was the first time last week, and it was completely automatic. Like it's even, the machine is speaking to you. It's like, put all your things here, and it scans them without scanning them. I mean, even that, like, I don't even know what kind of radiation can like read the barcodes without you even like doing anything on them. And then it tells you to kind of take off the hanger, and you know, then we don't need humans. So what's going to happen in a society where there aren't even enough jobs? Because I think that's the thing too, we are different. And my mom always said, oh, if I could just, used to love to iron, because she could just, when she was ironing, it was like she liked to kind of feel how the iron moved like on the clothes, and then she could like think about different things and like daydream. And she's like, if I could have this like a work. And you know, I think she has to 40, she has a projector, she has to 40 in an open center. And I think that part of why she is in constant burnout, her whole system has broken down, is because she should probably have done some of that work. And then she's a Leo, then she loves to be on stage. So she actually, exactly what you're saying, she lived a life, or she worked in a way that wasn't optimal for her. So I believe that there is still so much that we can do out in the world to help the community. And even the way that community is organized, we're going to have different geniuses. And it's also scary to kind of, you know, that's the flip side of too much work, is that humans are not needing it anymore, and everything's going to be like, even we are going to be hybrids where, you know, like I kind of think of like the horror of the other side as well. So that's, again, where's the equilibrium, where's the resolve? Because that's not the solution either, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually when we begin looking at the gift frequencies of this particular gene key, there is a use of energy that, while Richard Rudd doesn't really talk about it very much, it it creates it creates a greater vibrance through the system. So it's like, if you just like stop working, stop moving, stop exercising and all of that, your body will at some point start to fall apart. Work is good for your body. Your body needs to be worked and used. And when you're able to access that life force energy that's in harmony with the body that you have, then it actually promotes the health of that body system. The body works better when you're using that. And the it's sort of funny to imagine the horror. It's like this. I don't know if you ever saw this cartoon, but there's this old 1950s cartoon, The Jetsons, based on a future society with flying cars and the robot maid that basically does all the cleaning. And it's sort of weird because it's basically a 50s American family just transported into the future. The father works, and that's about the extent of the working. But it just sort of like, it's this idea that's been floating around in our societies for a long time about futurism, which is like, how can we stop doing work that we don't want to do, that makes our systems go into us in the direction of burnout, whether it's using our mind or the stress of work, or in some cases, just the way that we're using our body. The old factory systems, human beings aren't built to work like a machine on an assembly line. People's bodies fall apart after 20 years on an assembly line doing the same repetitive motion over and over again. It's not sustainable. So, that idea of relieving humankind of those types of uses of energy that are forceful in nature, it's been around for a long time. And I think moving in that direction really has to do with how each of us as an individual can design our lives that's in harmony with our inner awareness. Are we using our energy in a way that's good for us? And if we're not, do we know when enough is enough? Can we make those lines?
Yeah, what you're saying makes me think again back to the family, back to the tribe, and the responsibility of parents. Because I believe that this comes, if it's a tribal thing, it comes even before work. So what I'm thinking about is the children that have their iPad when they are not even a year old, and so many, we call it like motor problems in Sweden, but it's like, you are learning to swipe and use one finger, two fingers, and you're not learning to grab. You're not like that. That's a true problem for children today. And it just, I'm thinking about what kind of resolve is it that we give in the next generation. And I was in a yoga class yesterday, and they were saying studies has because some people have their phone, and some people in the gym even are actually filming themselves as they are doing yoga. And then I think they are like fast forwarding it and putting it in their stories or something. And then the yoga teacher was saying, studies show that just that you see your phone in the corner of your eye, the center in the brain that turns on automatically is the center that is turned on when somebody calls your name. So that is to be, constantly active and reminded. So how far away isn't that from that deep relaxation of the 40? That is kind of that person sitting in a man cave and the world is tuned out and there's nothing, there's just you in your relaxed body. And that's where God can come to visit. But just if you have a phone in the corner of your eyes, it's like, you're called out to the 3D. And where can God come in? Where can you surrender to the divine? And I feel like that's also when you don't have those moments of resolve and relaxation. That's when you have to, like you're saying, use your willpower and force your energy. And coffee, coffee is the biggest drug in a way, and sugar, and those things that we're using, the crutches, because our energy is not used in from within, like you're saying. That's what we are speaking about in the higher frequency of 40 as well. Like when you are aligned with the universe, when you're aligned with your purpose, when you're aligned in that geometry of the tribe, well, then you are going to be provided the energy to get the work done, to resolve the problem. But if you are like this cut off individual little being that is just completely kind of stuck in 3D. It's going to be like forcing and really harder to be able to get done what it is that wants to be done. And maybe even it is also something about what we think needs to be done might not really be the divine's plan. So that also even means you can go in the wrong direction by getting things done.
Oh yeah, I feel like one of the, at least for me, one of the largest learning curves on a spiritual path is being able to discern the difference between what we might call as divine will and my individual ego will, and saying like, well, I want things to go in such a way, this is the best result for me, versus allowing the universe to kind of reveal to me results that I couldn't have imagined, and a pathway that, while maybe not as comfortable as I would always want it to be, it helps me evolve as a human being in perhaps a way that the easier path that my willpower wants to put into place wouldn't have provided. And I mean, in terms of just like looking at how can we move more in that direction with the kind of society that we have, the family structures, the technology that we have right now, I believe it really requires a lot of inward attention, a lot of personal consideration about what are the true values that we want to create in the world. And, you know, we may not know what the consequences are of a small child only learning to use their index finger. In my personal opinion, because of the way that the nervous system is used, it's very likely that it's going to focus on certain areas of the brain to the exclusion of other areas. And, you know, we may see human beings in the future that, to some of us old schoolers from the old days before all of the digital technology, they seem like incredibly lopsided human beings who are totally incapable of certain things that, you know, we might consider natural. You know, and I think this, in speaking about yoga, I think it's really a pertinent subject, which is like, how can you be a complete human being? And, you know, I think that's what human design and gene keys is really all about at the end of the day, which is how can you be the best human being that you can be with the energy system that you have running? And, you know, moving in harmony with that energy system is what it's all about. So can we make those judgments to say, oh, these ways of being are not really in harmony with who we are? And I think that that takes a lot of reconsideration about our choices in the world, our agreement, and especially our agreements with the other people who are in the tribe with us, in our communities, what we're willing to do in order to create the things that we need to create in our life. Are we willing to totally compromise ourselves for our job? Are we willing to totally compromise our values for convenience? Are we willing to totally, you know, there's so many ways that this could be applied that impacts literally the entire planet. You know, it's really amazing, like how I feel like kind of on the surface, this particular gene key and looking at this shadow, it can seem a little bit like, well, you know, how do we digest our food and turn it into our body? And it's kind of as simple as that, but it's also as deep as, I mean, it goes everywhere. It has to do with everything in our lives. Really pretty incredible.
And maybe the last thing that I would bring up is that this is also a portal guardian to the seven sacred seals, and the seven sacred seals, that's the mystery school of the gene keys. And I don't know if other people made the same mistake as I did, but I sometimes don't read. I never read instructions or manuals, so I started to read the first seal first. Not I didn't start from the back. And I remember, I believe that what I experienced was the Richard would call it absorption, but like I kind of call it fall through in my SQ. It was that it kind of opened that portal to fall through and to then find my stability, which is the design Saturn on the other side. But it was very yin, because this SQ is Venus. It was a complete unstructured experience of, I would say, surrender. I couldn't have, it was for a week. I was just floating. I couldn't have any structure. I couldn't like be on time for anything. I had to like really just everything needed to be off my schedule. I was crying a lot. It was not in any way, it wasn't even emotional cries. But if you have read the first seal or listened to the incantation of the first and the second seal, you know how deep they are, and how deep even in those like places, like the bone marrow, all the memories of human suffering that we are carrying in those bones is there, and all the seeking and all the seeking of God outside of yourself is there. So when you kind of fall through that portal and then you fall into your heart, you fall into your Venus, like it is, it's not it is emotional, but it's more like kind of a beauty and a melancholy about the human predicament, I guess, is what I felt. And also an acceptance. Like I was sitting a lot on my balcony, and people were like walking. It was on the fourth floor in Paris, so people walking on the streets, and then I was spending time in the park, and then I would just kind of spend time shaking or doing movements, very formless somehow. And yeah, so the seven sacred seals, they are speaking to all our bodies, from the physical body in the 40 to the more and more subtle bodies. And yeah, the physical aspect here is extremely important, and knowing that physical aspect is just one of all the bodies that we can feel and express through. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything about the seven sacred seals or anything about the mystical part that you want to bring in,
Yeah,
John.
actually, I mean, since what we're doing is called Lunar Alchemy, and this is within our transit here, it's one of the codon ring of alchemy. You know, the every human being, despite the mystical view of it, is truly an alchemist by nature. We take anything from Twinkies and Big Macs to like pure raw fruits and vegetables, you know, whether your perspective on food is vibrational in nature, which I gave you a spectrum of that perspective, from super low vibration to super high frequency vibration. And then there's all sorts of other ways of looking at it, Ayurvedic perspectives, low, slow cooking and easy to digest. Our digestion literally transforms food and water and liquids of all kinds into our human body. So even from a yogic perspective, the very name of the physical body is called the food body, because looking at a human being, they're looking at the perspective of a human being as not just the physical body, but all of the variety of spiritual bodies that a human being is comprised of. And the physical part is just the food one. So we're all food alchemists. um, how do you see, Bella, this particular gene key as fitting into this idea of alchemy, this transformational power that turns something into something else within our realm of experience, where it starts as one thing and finishes as something completely different? lead and gold.
Yeah, I felt like I wanted to actually bring up, I don't know, I'm gonna see if Ashley has put it up on the website, because I felt that the codering of alchemy, it kind of came through the archetypes. Let's see if it's already up. Otherwise, I'll just go to Facebook, because this is what, so maybe I'll see if it's updated. Okay.
One thing while you're doing that I noticed is that the programming partner of 37, it happened, early as we began Lunar Alchemy, and we actually didn't cover it in our early sessions.
And it's going to be the same thing for the 64, right? Because we're going to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But we'll have a chance to do that. I'll do a new moon session for that. So that'll be.
So first, just to show, so you were mentioning the coding of alchemy. So these that start in the 40 and 64, 47 and 6 as well. So these are Virgo, all in Virgo. And Virgo is mutable earth. So very much the body, and how you're saying we can eat something one day and then it transforms into this. So it's very mutable, and it's very earth connected. And it also has to do, I believe, with that possibility of sacred work, the service to spirit through the sacred work of the body, which could be yoga or tantra or priestess work. So what I wanted to, so this felt relevant for, so we did mention the 7 sacred seals, and then it says, the father also has a close relationship with the peacemaker, which is archetype 6, the alchemist, which is archetype 47, and the artist, archetype 64. So these 4 are the coding of alchemy. So these 4 archetypes work together through a process of karmic release by bringing the repressed fears and traumas to the surface to be transformed and integrated throughout all of the subtle energetic bodies. So that's also what we mentioned. They do this through a process of breaking down barriers in relationships, creating, that would be the 6, creating more openness in communities, which I guess would be the 40, transforming old ways and leading the world towards new possibilities of living. With the resolve of the father, the diplomacy of the peacemaker, the alchemist's ability to transmute, and the imagination of the artist, the world would experience manifestations of peace on earth, where we will begin to relate to each other on a higher and more loving frequency. So this for me kind of brings, I don't know if that really exactly answered your question, but it's like the kind of geometry of these 4 jinkies together.
Beautiful. Yeah. The qualities of stages that transformation manifests as, that's a beautiful way to look at it. And when I first sent out an email about this particular session, because it does come up in the gift frequency of boundaries. And I think we'll probably get a chance to look more at that when we get to the 6. But there is these elements of movement through this process of transformation, and where we are right now is it's like this clarifying aspect of the process, and our energy bodies, our chakra system that connects to all of our subtle bodies, that karmic waveform that is put out into the world is very much related to the solar plexus center that is part of our chakra system. It's connected to, you might connect it to the mental body of our subtle bodies. It really has a lot to do with human willpower and how we utilize our energy and direct it into action and activity. In many people today, actually vast majority of people, this solar plexus chakra has become, chakras can get bigger and smaller. And most of the time they're, you know, maybe about like this big or so is kind of a normal size for a chakra. Of course, a little bit, we tend to see them as round, although they may have a different internal shape. Anyways, the solar plexus chakra for many, many people in today's societies has expanded to well beyond the boundaries of the physical body, because we are attempting to control and use energy to manipulate our environment in so many different ways. So for people that really can't relax, you know, if you're in the middle of some tasks and have no access to relaxation while you're in it, probably means your solar plexus has moved beyond the size of your body. And it's not a sustainable way to hold your energetic body. So clarifying the way that that energy comes through our bodies is kind of like, I love that that's kind of the first stage, and that father archetype really holds the resolve that's needed and what that really kind of means. You know, we can look at resolve as determination, or we can look at resolve as being rooted in what is appropriate for our bodies and for ourselves, you know. And I feel like that's what that archetype of the father really expresses, is that deep rooted knowingness of like, hey, this is what we do and this is what we stand for. Not like, not like, oh, here we can do all of these things in the world and all of this stuff regardless of the cost that it's going to take on ourselves or the community.
Mhm.
Completely different ways of looking at willpower.
You know, one more thing, which is the masculine can run away from the wound. And if this is the first of the seals, this is the core wound of repression. And one way of repressing is to just do a lot of things and to kind of solve a lot of things in the outer, or to serve others a lot. And then you feel like, okay, this is my purpose. And by doing that, you kind of bypass that deeper layer. So there is a lack of self-honesty, and there is a repression of something. So the 40 has that, like you kind of said, I don't know if, well, the inner firmness, in a way, the inner strength to go to those places. And I believe that goes back to your question before. This is what starts that process of alchemy, having that self-discipline in a way, to not only be disciplined on the outer, but actually be disciplined coming back, and with your self-honesty and whatever it is that you have bypassed or repressed, allow that to start to be integrated and inside of you. And then, like you're saying, the other keys come there, and they kind of go and crack even more. And we have light coming through already in the 64. And you know, it's almost like there's a continuous process. We're never done transmuting, we're never done alchemizing. That's the whole thing. Even with food, you know, we're never done in a way. Maybe we are, maybe we can leave on air soon, but you know, it's this continuous process, humans, that we are always, especially in those tribal keys, when it's with the other, there's always an alchemy going on.
Yeah, I love that you brought in that honesty with self, because that really ties in where we were last week with the shadow of dishonesty, and learning how to move into a space of intimacy with ourselves. It does require honesty, but with kindness. And once we have that developed, then we're able to move into this state of alchemy where we can transform ourselves. Really beautiful how everything is arranged in just this perfect flow of energy for our systems to integrate and transform. So in terms of the 64, the new moon is going to happen. I think that's going to be on Tuesday, but I'll double check that, and I'll do something for the 64 on that day, whenever that aligns up, so we can make sure to catch that. But for those of you watching on Facebook, thanks for joining us. We will continue with the solar members to to assist our energetic bodies, our solar plexus chakra, and how our energy patterns function to move into a state where we can begin to bring more of that relaxation into our systems that will allow for that gift of resolve to manifest more strongly, so that we can be more aware of how we're using our energy in the world, and we can be more clear in our agreements with our community and the tribe that we're all a part of, so that our energy is always being used in a way that benefits both us as individuals and the larger whole. So if that interests you, please make a comment that you're curious about that, and we'll get you details about how to join that membership so you can receive those quantum healing entrainments. And we'll see you another time. So thanks for joining us. All right. So I feel like we're ready to dive in. What do you think, Bella?
So I was going to start a new recording, but when I do stop recording, it says stop cloud recording. So I don't know if I stop your recording. So maybe I shouldn't.
I don't know. You can give it a try and